Actuary. And actuaries deal primarily with retirement, post-retirement medical benefits, health insurance, other things like that. And so I have a master's in applied math, which I use to pass the actuarial exams, that kind of thing. So I spent 10 years doing nothing but high-end retirement calculations for like companies like Tenet Healthcare, Alcatel Network Systems, things like that. Then I became the pastor of a church. So I walked away from a 10-year career as an actuary. I took a 5-fold cut in pay to become the pastor of a little community church. And I've now been pastor of that church for 20 years. So 10 years in actuary, 20 years as a pastor. But the other thing that kind of coincides or collides with y'all's world is that my wife is Dr. Kimberly Sweet. She's a pediatrician with Baylor Network. She's a graduate from UT Southwestern and Dallas Children's residency program. And we were married all through her college and medical school days and residency. So because of that, I view myself as having been married to the medical profession and married to medical school and all that comes with it. So I have a perspective from that end. So So I've done this presentation on financial stability for homes and families at our church numerous times, but on a couple of occasions have done so with people who are in the medical profession, for medical professionals. And so that's my background, and that is what kind of prompted Stan to ask me. I've done this before at UT Southwestern, and so that's why he asked me to do this evening. All right, so I'm going to, I have the perfect face for radio, so I'm going to screen share because that's a much better look for me if you actually see the screen. Now, here's the deal. If you have a question, the best way to probably do this is to put it in the chat. I've got the chat open, and so I find on Zoom that's usually the best way to do this. And I do 10 lectures a week on Facebook Live and 10 lectures a week on Zoom right now. So I'm on this stuff all the time. So if you just if you just want to post something in the chat, I can probably keep my eyes open on that, and then that way you can ask your questions as we're progressing through here. All right, so Your Money or Your Life, it comes from a famous 1940s radio skit with a guy named Jack Benny, who was known in the radio world in his his alter ego on the radio program as being a really tight with his money. And at one point he's got this skit where he's confronted on the street with a robber who points a gun at him, and the man demands, "Your money or your life?" And Jack Benny doesn't say anything. And the robber comes back again and says, "No, dude, really, your money or your life?" And Jack Benny says, "I'm thinking it over," because he was he was so tight with his money. And I do think there is some aspect of which much of our life and our money are connected very tightly. I know we would like to say they're not. I know we would like to think that they're not, but the reality is our lives and our financial resources drive a lot of things. If you're married, money can cause a lot of stress in a marriage. If you are single, money can still create lots of stresses about the decision you make and where you're going to live and what residency program you think you should go into and how quickly you think you should get out of residency and into private practice. It might affect whether you think you should do private practice in a place where you can pull down $160 a year plus at start, or whether you're willing to go to an underserved community that you're going to pull down $90 a year or something, because that's the way life goes. So, so I want to talk about just kind of these kinds of financial issues. Now, here's the thing. I'm not a certified financial planner, financial analyst. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. So I'm not giving this presentation as a professional in these areas. I am a pastor of a church. I was an actuary. I'm not. My enrollment's probably expired now. I'd have to go back and re-sign up, do some continuing education to get it reactivated. So I haven't done actuarial work in probably 18 years. So I'm not giving you any professional advice here. I'm just speaking as a pastor and as a married to a doctor, pastor with a couple of kids and a house and all those kinds of things. All right. So I want to start out with 6 basic biblical principles about money, okay? And I have all of these notes in PDF form, which I will email to Stan when we're done. And that way he can forward them on to you. But I just want to talk through these just real quickly. And the first biblical principle is this, and this is one of the hardest ones to navigate in terms of our own hearts, which is that God actually owns everything. And it's hard because you buy your first car, you get out of medical school, you get into residency, you actually start getting paid. Look, medical school is one of the most genius financial schemes ever invented. You work like crazy and pay them to do it. And I wish I could come up with this scheme. I mean, it's a little bit like Tom Sawyer and the fence painting. You remember that in Tom Sawyer's, the Mark Twain book, where Tom Sawyer convinces all the neighbors to come pay him to paint his fence. Well, you guys have all been paying in order to work for someone else. And now some of you are in the residency. We're getting paid at least an okay salary, not great, but okay. And then there's this really radical shift that happens after you finish residency. A lot of times the pay will quadruple, triple, or quadruple when you go into private practice, or you work as a hospitalist, or whatever. Or even if you work in a public clinic, Parkland Clinic or something like that, you would probably make 100,000 plus, 3 or 4 times what residencies usually pay, if I remember correctly. And I think that's still, I've looked at these numbers, I think that's still pretty accurate. Now, the problem is, though, while you're in medical school, it is virtually impossible to work. Most other college students and graduate students probably have opportunities to work, and it is just impossible to work and be a medical student, especially after your first year. I think starting into your second year, it becomes virtually impossible, and you certainly aren't going to get a second job very likely as a resident, at least not during your first or second year. And maybe even during your third year, that would be a real challenge. And so as such, when you finally graduate, you feel like, oh, I finally have some money. But I just want us to live with the reality that whatever money and paycheck that you and I earn, ultimately God owns everything, and we have to live with that mindset. Psalm 24:1, one of my favorite verses, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, the world and all those who dwell in it. So we don't own ourselves. We didn't make ourselves. You didn't make yourself smart enough to be a doctor or a medical professional. That's a gift from God. You may have had the discipline to get through medical school, but even that was a gift from God. And when you get a job and you start pulling down 160, 180 a year, which would be great, sounds great. You break 200 grand for the first time or something. That's awesome. Just realize that God ultimately owns all of it. And as smart as this group is, which I have been around medical people before, you guys are smart. It's fine. That's fine, just as long as we realize God is way smarter and he owns way more than us. All right, so God owns everything. Second thing is this: God knows our needs and promises to meet our needs. One thing about doctors is that I've noticed is a prevailing sense of self-sufficiency. You've spent your whole life fighting through really challenging stuff. Undergrad was brutal because you majored in something that was hard. You weren't majoring in, communications or something. You were in biochemistry classes and cell biology classes and physics and calculus and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, your gen ed class was Cal 1 and 2, that kind of thing. So because of that, there becomes a sense of like you're used to fighting for what you get and what you earn and for surviving. Medical school is about survival in many ways. In fact, I think the old statement was both third year and patients enter Parkland at the same time. The patient enters in a wreck and the student enters in fairly good health, and they both leave Parkland in about the same shape. About the patient entered a complete wreck and now leaves half the shell of what they could have been or could be, and the physician that entered as a whole person now leaves us half the shell of the person when they enter. They leave it about the same level. And you're used to that kind of fighting and survival and scratch and claw your way. But just remember that God owns everything and that he promises to meet our needs. And so ultimately, we want to live with our heart dependent upon him and not on ourselves. And that's hard for doctors in training and the like, because you've been self-reliant your whole life. Something we should celebrate, but to be cautious. Matthew 6:30 and through 32, it's a great text on worry and anxiety and these kinds of things. If God clothes the grass of the field, and he clothes, the lilies of the field, the grass of the field, and which are thrown in the furnace, alive one day, thrown in the furnace the next. Will he not much more clothe us? So why do we say, well, will I eat, will I drink? And instead of being dominated by these things, a prevailing sense of trust in God. All right, number 3, anxiety is a sin even if it concerns money. Yeah, and now I'm not talking about some generalized medical condition of an anxiety disorder, okay? Let's distinguish that. And as a pastor, I do regularly. There are people in my church that have generalized anxiety, and it has nothing to do with them worrying about some specific issue. This isn't the issue. That's a physiological issue, okay? So let's ignore that. What I'm talking about is the person that does not have like a generalized anxiety, or even if they do, they're laying at night with their head on the pillow going, that credit card bill is going to hit tomorrow. Or should we buy this car or not? Or man, buying a house, I don't know if this is a good idea. And literally tossing and turning for hours. This is called the kind of worry that the Bible is describing. And even if it's about money, it's not okay. Like there's not an exemption. When Jesus says, don't worry what your life will be like tomorrow, there's not like an asterisk on it that says, except for when it comes to money, then you can worry. There's no exemption. So you and I are supposed to live with an attitude of trusting God and not allow anxiety over specific needs like clothing and shelter and these kind of things to drive our sleep, to drive our thoughts, to drive our heart rate, to drive our relationships. When you're anxious like that, it affects your marriage, it affects your friendships. And so to be really careful about that. All right. Jesus said the 6:25, I just kind of mentioned it, but for this reason, I say to you, do not be worried about your life. So that's why, by the way, if someone says they have kind of a general anxiety disorder, this is not a good verse to quote at them. Jesus is talking about someone who's worried about what they're going to eat or drink or what they're going to wear. People with generalized kind of anxiety, they're not worried about something specific usually. They usually say, I don't know why I feel anxious. This is very specific. This is about individuals who are worried about food and shelter. And it's not to say we don't have to think about those things, but there's a difference between thinking about them, planning, then letting our anxiety, our heart rate be up, our relationships strained, and lack of sleep and tossing and turning, those kinds of things. Number 4, every decision in life, including those about money, is a spiritual decision. See, a lot of times what we do as Christians is we reduce spiritual decisions to, well, I didn't cheat on my spouse, and I went to church, and then we go to buy a new car, and it's like, well, that's not really a spiritual issue. I mean, it's a car. It's an inanimate object. Well, we find out in the Bible that Jesus actually says more about money than just about any other issue, and which is surprising. You're like, well, I get it on the sexual, moral issues or something like that, or I get it on like don't be mean to people or don't hate people. Yeah, that's all true. Those are definitely spiritual decisions, but so is money, and the way we spend our money is a spiritual issue, and so we should be cognizant of that. That every decision we make is spiritual. And that includes money. Whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. And what a helpful verse. Whatever you do, like rounding on your patients at 6:30 tomorrow morning, or filling out applications for your residency program or some fellowship or something like that, or what job you're going to take. You're going to take a job in some clinic in Kansas City. That's cool, but that has to be done to the glory of God. And so all these things, constantly thinking, what does God want me to do? How could I honor him through that? And that includes the way we spend our money. And number 5, contentment with godliness must mark the life of every believer. So not just contentment, like, man, I'm really content with life, and then ignoring God and ignoring godliness, but they work together. And there's this great verse in 1 Timothy 6. It said, godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. So if you have someone who's super godly, like, man, I want to get my thoughts are all pure and my relationships are all good, but then they're really discontented all the time. Like there's this constant sense of, well, life's not right. It's not like this. It should be like this. And I understand this prevailing sense of discontentment. I have a 17-year-old. And 17-year-olds are continually discontented, I found out. I have a 19-year-old, and he used to be discontented. At 19, they start to chill. 17, everyone's discontented. The weather's not right, and especially in a COVID-19 crisis. So, anyway. All right, and then the last thing is money should be viewed by believers as a tool, not only for providing for our basic needs, and for blessing others, but also doing good works in the name of God. Now, let me just say this to you. Every decision you make is, as a believer in Christ Jesus, every decision you make is fused with eternal meaning. When we die, heaven or hell is not based on any good works. It is based on faith in Jesus Christ. But the reward for the believer in heaven does depend on how we lived out our Christian walk. The scripture is filled with evidence that heaven is not the same experience for every believer, that there is a reward, that there is a difference, and that living this life sacrificially and with the purposes of God ever present in our thinking is a means to a much greater reward. Now, I spend a lot of my time out of the country. I spend the month of January every year in Asia, in the Korean refugee camps in Thailand. I go to Myanmar. I go to another place. I also go every year for a week in Mexico. And when I'm around the pastors there, I train about 400 to 500 pastors every year in those settings. And I will tell you right now, I am absolutely convinced when American pastors get to heaven, we are going to be near the back of the line, and these no-named individuals, no name on their buildings, 50 church members, everyone walks to church. These guys struggle for survival in terms of just daily living. When heaven metes out real reward, those individuals will be rewarded greatly. And then I'll elbow you as we stand at the back of the line and say, hey, I met that guy in Myanmar. And so there really is here an aspect of, I don't want you to waste your life. I don't want you to get to heaven and turn to me and go, hey, remember that night you did the finance class? Why didn't you tell me that my joy at this moment right now in front of Christ Jesus was going to depend on what I did? I don't want that. I don't want that responsibility, which is why I tell my church on a regular basis, what you do with your time, money, and energy matters forever. Every moment is fused with everlasting meaning. And so if you spend $1 million on a yacht or you spend $1 million supporting orphans, those are going to look very different in eternal economy in the presence of God, assuming that the giving of the money to the orphans was done with humility, with the sense of the glory of God, and a desire to serve him, assuming that was the motive. And so I just don't want you to waste the resources you have to build up an everlasting reward. And so that's very important to me. And so when I was an actuary, I was a risk manager. What I did was try to keep companies from losing large chunks of money due to financial decisions. And what I don't want to do now, now I'm a risk manager differently. Now I'm a risk manager where I don't want you to take resources and squander them that could have resulted in heavenly reward. And so I want to mention that to you. All right, now, so those are the 6 biblical principles. I want to move from that to 6 practical principles for money. Some of these are in the Bible explicitly. Some of these are a product of 21st century American commerce, and you just have to adjust using practical wisdom. I get some of these things from people like Dave Ramsey, or there's some other individuals that have also been greatly influential on me. So these aren't unique ideas to me. None of this stuff is unique to me. I'm just sharing things I've kind of pulled together. Galatians 6 says, hey, don't grow weary in doing good, for in due time we will reap a harvest. See, that's just saying that what we do with our time, money, and energy matters forever. And that's why it ends with, let us do good to all people, especially those of the household of faith. All right, so Galatians 6, 7 through 10. All right, let's talk about 6 practical things concerning money. Number 1 is this. This is shocking, spend less than you make. Now, if you're a medical student, this is the most laughable point I could have ever put on the screen. How are you going to spend less than you make when you aren't making anything and you're spending a ton? Yes, I get it. 30 grand a year just to stay alive and to pay for tuition and fees. And that's assuming you could get 4 other people to cram into some 2-bedroom apartment somewhere. I get it. It's difficult. And so while you're in medical school, this does not always play out really well. Now, I would caution against taking on massive amounts of debt, but the reality is from everyone who introduced yourself, it's already too late if you did. So, hey, let's ignore that for the moment. If you're an entering medical school student, I would talk to you about how to minimize that kind of debt. I was fully employed with a good job as an actuary when Kim was in medical school, so she graduated without any medical school debt. That is a very rare thing. I realized that we were in a unique situation. We lived very frugally, and I had a really good job as an actuary. So when she graduated, we did not have medical school debt. But this is not common. Most common is what? Medical students, 100 to 150,000, I would assume, in that range. If they have some family maybe helping them, they may, cut that in half. If they have no support at all, I would not be surprised to see 200,000 plus as debt. And then you go to residency, and now you're making 40,000 a year, which is not going to pay down that debt. It's not. That's just enough so that you don't starve to death. So, so the spend less than you make is really you graduated from residency and now you're entering into your first practice, okay? And so you finished residency. I heard some of the things you guys are doing sounded amazing, and I think obviously duly employable. So let's suppose you're gonna get your first job. Let's just be conservative. Let's say $125,000 a year is your offer. You're gonna start this first job. Okay. Now the temptation would be, wow, I got my job, $125,000. I'm going to go to the bank. I'm going to borrow money. I'm going to get me a new car, and I'm going to buy a $250,000 house. And I would just say to that, please don't do that, because what's going to happen is you are not going to make a dent in that medical school debt. And I would probably make that one of my top priorities. So spend less than you make becomes really a primary kind of the statement I would make about those who are in practice now outside of residency. All right. The first way to do this, though, is you got to find out where your money's going. I meet with families all the time. I'm like, our credit card debt keeps building. We keep building this credit card debt. I go, well, where's your money going? And they look at me like, I don't know. Well, I tell you what, bring your checkbook, bring all your credit card statements, bring every debt you've got, and let me look at it. And we lay it out, and it's like, well, what's this? It's like, well, that's our 24-hour fitness membership. I'm like, dude, you're building up $500 a month in credit card debt. You don't need to be working out a 24-hour fitness. Run around your neighborhood or something. What in the world? So 24-hour fitness is fine. Lifetime fitness that's a fine membership, but not when you have massive debt and you're spending more than you make. Cut the cable. Keep internet and watch reruns of old movies on YouTube or something. I don't know. But there's lots of ways you can cut your bills. I've had individuals in front of me with $1,000 worth of 2 car payments, $200 worth of cable TV, and then a monthly membership for $100 a month for a gym. And I look at them like, why are we even having this conversation? These are all decisions that you will never get out of this spiraling debt. So you got to make hard decisions. Drive old cars and all those kinds of things. Drive until they die. A car is not finished until you get the gun out and shoot it. That's when you know you've finally finished the car off. Anything before then, keep driving. All right, and here's the other thing. So figure out where your money's going. Number 2 is find places to save money. Big items first. I think big items first be car payments. You rented the most beautiful apartment in all of Chicago for $3,800 a month. I'm like, hey, I bet there's a pretty nice apartment for $2,000 a month. How about that one? So I would say, find big ticket items and try to shave money off of those. Car payments and housing would be 1 and 2. Number 3 is make a budget. Make a budget. After you've made some hard decisions, figuring out where your money's going, trying to say, okay, how can we get our rent down? How can we get our utility costs down? How can we get rid of this car that's an albatross? After you do that, let's sit down now and make a hard budget and make sure we're spending less than we make, and then stick to it. Don't make the budget and go, man, I've always wanted to go to Tahiti. I got an idea. Let's go to Tahiti. It's like, well, didn't we just make a budget? Yeah, don't worry about that thing. Stick to your budget. And then the next thing is, if you fail to stick to your budget, start back on it immediately. What happens is sometimes it's like dieting, right? It's just like dieting. Someone's like, I'm going on a diet. And then 2 weeks into it, they go to the cheesecake factory and they order the whole cheesecake. And then it's like, well, I blew my diet. So then they just, they toss it aside. Well, people do this with budgets all the time too. Don't do it. Start back as soon as you've blown the budget. It's like, man, we went out and spent $300 watching movies and I don't know what anyway. And then you go, okay, next weekend we're not doing that. We're gonna watch movies at home for free or something. And then banish the big spender in your home to some like dungeon somewhere. Okay, I'm kidding. Don't do that. But it does seem like in every family, and in my family, it's my 17-year-old. But in every family, there's always a big spender. My 17-year-old can outspend everyone on this Zoom conference right now in a heartbeat. He is the biggest spender on the planet. And there's just times when you have to identify, okay, look, you need to chill out on the spending. I love you. You're awesome. You're amazing. But you did not need 42 pairs of, well, in Michael's case, New Balance turf shoes for baseball, or the next A2000 baseball glove released by Rawlings or something like that. It's like, hey, Dad, I want a new glove. Really? How much does it cost? $380. I'm like, okay, we'll go get a job. That kind of thing. So, and then last thing is generate new income. That's one other thing you can do, is find a way to generate some additional income. And so I would recommend that. All right, so spend less than you make. That's number one. Number two is $1,000 emergency cash. I actually pushed this up to $2,000 if you're married with kids, because $1,000, that's a refrigerator repair or, fix the oven or something. But if you have a 17-year-old, $2,000 is what it costs after he off-roaded in his lifted Ford F-150 a couple of weeks ago and broke the cable that connected to the gear shift. $2,000 if your son's name is Michael and he's 17 and drives a big old truck. All right. And then make sure that it's easy to get to, but that it's not so easy that you get used for non-essential things. So in other words, $1,000 does not mean put it in your cup holder in your car, okay? That's probably not going to survive. $1,000 being in a bank account, like a savings account or something that you just kind of psychologically set aside for that purpose, okay? So that's the next thing. Everyone needs $1,000 emergency cash. So that takes a little bit building up. That's why I say get a budget, spend less than you make, and then try to get this emergency cash fund. Usually why people deficit spend on credit cards is because an emergency happened. Like your son off-roading breaks the cable that connects to the gear shift column. Like, how did he do that even? I don't even know how you do that. I didn't know there was a cable that ran underneath your car that connected to that thing, but he broke it off, okay? So I'd have it towed and that repaired. $600. Just like that, okay? So you got to have funds for those kinds of things, all right? Number 3, eliminate all consumer debt. Now, I'm speaking to a group of people who might be okay on some of these items, but I know is probably in trouble on college loans. Some of you got done with college with loans and then went to medical school, which just deferred those college loans even further and then dogpiled with medical school debt. And then some of you guys floated some credit cards and a few department store cards and a gas card and so forth and so on. Elimination of all consumer debt is really, really critical. And what I would do is make a list and then pay the minimum on all but 2 of those cards and or 2 of those debts, and then go after these 2. These are the 2 I want you to go after. Half of it to the smallest amount, half of it to the largest interest rate. The reason for that is success breeds additional success. So go after the smallest one, because when you pay that off, you can like high five people, like I paid off that credit card, and it just feels good. And it also frees up money that's now not a requirement to pay every month, and then go after the next smallest one. But while you're doing that, I'm splitting that equally with the largest interest rate card and trying to get that one eliminated as well. And so what I said here is like make $100 extra payment on both the smallest amount and the largest interest rate. That's an example. You can do $200 a month each on those, whatever works for you. And then add no new consumer debt. And then the last step in eliminating debt would be to pay off your mortgage. My wife and I have 17 payments to go. I'm so excited. 17 payments and our house will be paid off. And then my son will probably spend whatever that mortgage payment was on who knows what. But okay. All right. So number 4 is this: save. So after you have the $1,000 emergency fund and after you've paid off revolving debt, not before you pay off the mortgage. Pay off the mortgage is below this one, actually. Number 4, save 3 to 6 months of expenses. And this is so that if you lose your job or you get sick, suppose you get sick and you need to take 3 months or 6 months to get to deal with the illness, or maybe a parent gets sick and you say, man, I really need to go take care of them. So I would on those easily liquidated assets, meaning money markets accounts or short-term CDs, or you can even have them in investment instruments like a bond fund or something like that, but you just want it to be somewhere like E-Trade or Fidelity where you could sell it easily and liquidate it, because your mom or your dad just had a heart attack or something, and you need to suddenly take care of them or something like that. So having 3 to 6 months expenses, and 3 to 6 depends on this. How many incomes are there in the home? If there are 2 incomes, then I would probably target 3 months because you have more flex. If you have a sole income, so maybe someone's a stay-at-home parent or something like that, and you have 1 income in your home, I would target 6 months in that case, because that loss of a job there would be more devastating in that case. All right, and so number 5, save for the future. Save for retirement. You guys are like, save for retirement. I'm just trying to keep the chief resident from yelling at me. So save for retirement. Well, yeah, you need to save for retirement. If you start in your 20s and 30s, you can put back 10%, 15% a year, and you'll be good. At 65, you'll have plenty of money. If you wait till you're 60 and older, your retirement plan is to work until you turn 80. That's your retirement plan. Which, by the way, Moses got his calling at the burning bush at the age of 80. So don't discount this. You can probably do it. And your doctors, you guys are used to working tired, so it's okay. All right. And then you can, I would also look at investing. And so let me give you this strategy. And this is a strategy I encourage every person I talk to in the world of family finance. Buy your first house at 1.5 to 2 times annual income. And what I mean by that is, if you make $50,000 a year, find a $100,000 house. If you don't have, if you say, well, I want to buy a $120,000 house, then save $20,000 and buy $120,000, and then do that. Yeah. So, okay. Good question. Natasha, I think that's, let's see, do any of these investment choices change now during the COVID crisis with federal interest rates down to 0? You predict that some of these investments, options, bonds, et cetera, likely backfire. Yeah, I would not right now go out and buy the high risk blue chip stock that is, the person selling to you is telling you 20% returns or something. Personally, I'm at about 25% market exposure on our retirement. And we've been saving since I was 22, because I started working as an actuary. And actuaries, all they do is retirement. I got it drummed into my head immediately. You got to save for retirement. So we're being really conservative right now. Interestingly enough, though, I sold on last Friday. I thought the market overdropped a few weeks ago, and we bought in about 4 weeks ago. And then I thought it went up too far and then sold and got right back out. So I flipped about 7% on the R&R retirement funds. And then I got back into mostly cash. So yeah, I do think it's pretty risky right now. Long term, though, most of you guys, you'll be doing dollar cost averaging anyway. And what I mean by that is, early on in your retirement savings, what happens is the account is growing not by investment return anyway. The account is mainly growing by the money you put in. Early on in your saving, you're buying in, and you're buying in. If the market's crashing, that means you're buying in as it gets cheaper and cheaper. And as it recovers, that means that money's going to return. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you're just now starting to invest, I would still put myself at a 50-50 exposure between market and other fixed incomes. On bonds, I would be careful with that. Really high risk, like class B B-rated bonds or something like that. But good AAA rated insurance-backed bonds or things like that, I think those are fine and safe. I also think, things like there's some fixed income type accounts that you could be in, but you're going to dollar cost average. You guys are all young. You're all buying into retirement for the first time. I'm elderly. So at my age, my annual return is way bigger than the money we put in, is the hope. And it doesn't always work out that way, but that would be the hope. So as you get older, you change your strategy because your risk are greater. When you're younger and you're putting it in, you go, well, what if the market's crashing? I go, yeah, but you're putting money in now at this cheaper rate. And as you buy in at that cheaper rate, it's eventually going to pop back. Yeah, Stan, I'm younger than you only on the birth certificate. Yeah, so index funds. Yeah, so there are many that recommend index funds and yeah, I would not buy individual stocks. So if that's what you're asking, yeah. And I do think for people who are younger, long-term is the right way to handle this. You're buying in, you're dollar cost averaging. Index funds, a good S&P fund is great. They usually have very low fees. Fidelity and E-Trade both have S&P 500 index funds. You can balance those with some nice, AA and above rated bond funds that also have very low fees, index funds. And I would take that approach with your investing. Use index funds. They have low fees. And yeah, on the timing of the market, yeah, don't do that kind of thing. I think I did it a little bit this year, but even then I was careful with it. But also my background is in a situation where I'm quite familiar with assets. I was dealing with corporate funds and pension funds that had $1 billion in them and were making $100 million transactions. So I feel comfortable in this realm as I watch some other aspects of the market. Most people don't have that kind of time to mess with it. And my wife, I don't want her messing with it at all. It's just not her deal, so I would be careful about that too. There's also just an education effort issue that makes it not worthwhile. Okay. So in that regard, buy index funds, just buy and hold at this early part of your retirement savings. As you get older, you may go, man, we've already made 20% this year. I'm going to start taking some profit here. But that's if your balance is $250,000, $500,000 or more before you start messing with things like that. The other thing, next question from Daniel is there a reason to prioritize saving for retirement now versus trying to pay off my student loans sooner? Boy, that's a great question. Here's the real issue is that if your company, which almost every place you guys are going to work will have a match, you should always take the match. That will way offset any interest savings that you would get by paying off debt sooner. So for instance, let's suppose you go work at Dallas Children's. I want to say Dallas Children's was dollar for dollar up to 5%, if I remember correctly. So if you put in 5, or maybe it was 50 cents on the dollar up to 8. I don't remember. Something like that. So if you do that, then you put back 8% of your money and they put back 4. Well, that's a 50% return on, that's dollar for dollar up to 3.
So yeah, 3%. It's 3%.
Okay, 3%. Okay. It's dollar for dollar though. So that's a 100% return. So if you say, well, I'm going to save 5% on or 10% on my school loan by paying it off, or I'm going to make 100% on getting the match money from my employer, get the match. But I don't know that I would do much more than the match. Right now, your incomes are probably not going to be high enough to where protecting tax brackets is a huge deal. And I think I would probably target the max match, and then I would prioritize paying down debt right now is probably what I would do. But you cannot let the match go. Okay, you got to take the match. And so at Baylor, I think, what is it at Baylor? Dollar for dollar 5? Am I imagining that? 5? Okay. And the church, even the church I work for, as the pastor of the church, I had to put in a match. We're 50 cents on the dollar up to 6%. So even the church matches. And so I'd be foolish to not put back the match, All right. Okay. Let's see. The last one, live with your hands open because you cannot outgive God. My life experience has been that God tends to make things work out. I don't know why. If we spend carefully, but then we see opportunities to minister and we go, man, I don't know. It's a little tight this month, but that looks like a really good thing to pour into or to invest in. God just has a way of making it work out. Now, I don't think he's going to make you rich, so don't buy the televangelist stuff, but I do think he will take care of your needs. And I remember one time there was a guy in Myanmar that had reached out to me. And he and I had emailed several times, and he'd come in contact with me because of some friends I had in another part of Asia. And I was just skeptical. Like, he had this children's home, and I just didn't know, like, is this the right thing to do? He really wanted some help. He wasn't really begging, but I could just see this massive need. And finally, I wired him $500. And I was nervous. I was like, man, I hope I didn't get ripped off. I checked his references. There was a guy in Chicago that was a pastor of a church that knew him really well. And I talked to that pastor and everything. And that night when I got home, my bank on our mortgage had withheld escrow and sent me a check for exactly $500. And it was as if God said, look, that was the right decision. You're fine. You did it with trust in me. It wasn't about getting rich, but it's almost just God saying, look, that was my money anyway. I just loaned it to you to see if you were going to actually do something positive with it. And I've had experiences like that over and over again. It turns out now, this gentleman is now someone I'm partnered with, and we went this year, took a medical team. They just had a polio outbreak, and my wife and these medical team was there to start. We did a whole rehab program with them. We got vaccines on tap. It's just amazing, just what's going on with those kinds of things. All right, What is the biblical perspective on generating income on investments in companies that do some things that do not honor God? Oh, that's a good question. This is hard because if you buy index funds, you're going to be blindly doing that. And I think on that, the reality is it's almost impossible to avoid some of this because every company you work for is going to be doing business with people that you may not be your preference. You'll spend your life chasing this. And I would just say it's one thing to buy an index fund as opposed to saying, I'm going to go out and buy, $1 million worth of shares in, I don't know, a cocaine distributor. Okay, I'm making stuff up. But I'm just saying, like you just go, that this is illegal. These people are bad. Yeah, I agree with that, like individual stock purchases like that. But on an index fund, 99% of them are going to be just good, right buying companies like Walmart and stuff like that. And I think you can probably just say, that it's not any different than you go to Walmart, you go to wherever. There's some element, small element of that, of things that we would say, well, that's not good. But I think, I would be careful about like running out and buying individual stock in Budweiser or something like that. If you go, I don't like the beer companies. I think too much damage has come from that. That's fine that you have that opinion. And I would say then avoid that. But on the index funds, I think with 500 companies in there, it's not like you're the difference between some of that activity or not. And the vast majority of them are fine companies, Apple, Walmart, all that kind of stuff. Next question was, what is the rule for the first house again? Okay, so the bank will loan you 3 times annual income. Please don't do that because they assume when you buy that first house that they're happy with you sitting in the living room that has no furniture and never going out to dinner and never giving any money to church and never having a vacation. So don't do it. 1.5 times pay is a great rule of thumb. 2 times pay would be the max. If you'll follow that rule the rest of your life, you will be very happy. Kim and I follow that rule. In fact, we've tried to follow 1 times pay on all the house purchases. And in doing so, here's what's happened. We bought our first house, and instead of selling it, we flipped it into a rental property. So we now we had 3 rental properties. I sold 1, but we have 2 rental properties that were houses we lived in. And the renter is paying the mortgage, and both of them have grown by 50% equity. And it's a great investment strategy. Buy your first house at 1.5 times pay, work for a little bit, save up, and go, I'm ready for a bigger house. Instead of selling the first house, flip it into a rental and hold on to it. And if you'll do that about 3 times, by the time you get to retirement, you will own 2 or 3 houses and you will be generating passive income. And the only issue is being a landlord, but there's companies that will manage that for you too and keep 10%, and they'll manage all that for you. And if you own them outright, you won't care about 10%. And so that's a really good way to build income. So my wife and I have 2 houses that are rent houses right now. Let's see, would you just invest in 1 index fund? I would probably try to target 1 stock fund and 1 diverse, like probably some type of bond fund. And I would also keep a portion of it in some type of fixed income that I can easily move quickly in case I see a buying opportunity, which is what Kim and I just did, as I described a little bit ago. 50-50, it would depend. I would say, 50-50 is fine. Never a particular rule of thumb. The younger you are, the more aggressive you should be. And so 60-70% is fine on the stock, but I would always have a stock and bond mix. There are, if you want to diversify more than that, there are funds that are called Retirement 2030 funds and Retirement 2035 funds. And these are individuals who are targeting based on your age and how long you are from retirement. And some of those are really good index funds. A lot of the retirement companies provide those, and Baylor does. We use those, actually. Those are the ones I jockey money around in. I go from the 2030 fund to the 2015 fund. That's how I go from liberal or aggressive to more conservative funds. And so, so 50-50 is not a bad rule of thumb. And again, realizing that your money's primarily going to grow by the money you put in it right now and the match you get. All right. So, okay. So here's the deal. This is the 6 biblical principles plus 6 practical principles concerning money. Now, there's a bunch of other things we could talk about here, but I am going to give a PDF file to all of you, 3 PDF files to all of you that includes some stuff on auto insurance, life insurance, some information on medical insurance. It includes some information on investments, investment strategy, types of investments. And so I'm going to send that to Stan and have him email that to everyone. and see if those things might help. Can one diversify away too much though? Yeah, sure. You don't want to be in 20 different funds. The first of all is a lot of times on that, you're starting to pay fees, because if you're that diverse, you're probably buying into a managed indexed fund, not an index fund. There would be no reason to buy 4 different S&P index funds. They're all invested identically. They're all going to have the exact same return. So the only reason that someone would have multiple funds is if they are invested in managed funds. And those usually have some pretty high fees, 1%, 1.5%. Index funds tend to have, kind of a fee structure of 0.25% or less, 4 or 5 times less than what those others are. So, yeah. So, okay. So what I'll do is I will email you guys. I know you guys, it's been an hour, and talking about money for an hour is probably a violation of 15 minutes beyond what's proper. But, yeah, so, I'll email you those, and let's do this. Stan, why don't you see if there's interest after we've had this initial conversation and those PDF files, if people want to get back together again in a few weeks, having thought through this. I don't mind doing that. And even if it's a smaller group, I mean, some of you go, man, I'm never doing this again. I get it. Yeah. People have that reaction to a lot of things I do online, so it's okay. But yeah, if we get out a few weeks, go, okay, I'll look through some of this. I got questions about automobile insurance, or how do I get an umbrella policy, and what is that, and why would I insure an umbrella? It seems like you just use it in the rain. No, that's something else. The umbrella policy, I would recommend doctors all have umbrella policies. You need to look at that. Doctors, if you run a red light and kill somebody, when they get you to a courtroom, they're going to say, Dr. So-and-so, who should be protecting life, killed my brother. Well, they're going to sue you way worse than any malpractice suit you've ever seen. So everyone, you guys need umbrella insurance. You just do. It's a necessary evil. $1 million policy is what I would target. Now, the only thing about $1 million umbrella policy is it makes everything else more expensive too. It means your homeowner's insurance will go up, renter's insurance will go up, and automobile insurance will be higher too, because they make you press those limits higher. But I highly recommend all of you have health insurance, life insurance, an umbrella policy. I would have all 3 of those at various levels. Okay, so I'll send you info on all that kind of stuff, and then if you guys would like to get back together, Stan, does that work for you?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Daniel. We actually had planned to have a Q&A after your talk. So I think they're prepared to ask questions now if you have time to take them, or are you trying to get home?
I've got 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I promised my beloved that I would leave here in 10 minutes. So I'm cool. If you want to chat the questions or ask them verbally, that's cool. On the disability insurance, I agree with that. Debbie mentioned disability insurance. What I would say about disability insurance is that most of you guys will be working for employers that provide it, and you should use your employer's disability insurance. You're going to do better there than you will in the open market. But I would distinguish between short-term and long-term disability. You can over-insure on disability. Like, for instance, Kim and I buying a ton of disability insurance doesn't make sense, since we're within a few years of being able to retire outright. And that would be weird, because if something did happen to one of, I doubt both of us would become disabled simultaneously. So surely we could then go, well, I'm just going to work a little bit longer. That kind of thing. So on disability insurance, try to buy it from your employer. Now, if you own your own practice, then you got a whole host of things there. Yeah, on that, I would just say, wow, you're hanging a shingle out? No one does that, do they anymore? You're better off in a group probably these days in terms of just help and support and dealing with insurance companies. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So yeah, you guys are welcome. I want, here, again, my motive is quite simple. I want God to be glorified in your life to the maximum. And some of that includes the way you have these gifts to do medicine. And I know for my wife, she does a lot of medical things that I think are intended to serve God. For instance, she spent, like I said, in Myanmar. She has been to the Sudan multiple times. She went to Haiti after the earthquake happened right afterwards. She spent a couple of weeks during that time. She's been to work with Syrian refugees and to, well, I don't know, place after place after place, and having enough money to do that so that we don't get support from anyone. What I would say is save your money so that you can use it for kingdom resources. Oh yeah. So another question, how do we incorporate Acts 4 when the church had everything in common? The answer is live with your hands open. There's better instruments to do it with today. In other words, your church may have a benevolence fund. Your church may have a church planting fund. That's why I'd like you to buy 1.5 times the size of your income house so that you can go, hey, you know what? We're going to give away 20% of our money. And we're going to, like in our family, we've had people live with us. We had a young lady and her child, her newborn infant, live with us for 3 years. And you want to live with your hands open. You just want to live in a spot where you go, look, I don't know how God's going to use me. We got 4 bedrooms, and one of them's now going to be used by this young lady and her child. And we've had other people kind of live with us for a while, and you just want to live with your life and your hands open. So the way to do that is don't spend all your money. If you're getting credit card bills and you owe, $42,000 to Chase, it's hard to live with your hands open. So I think the way we incorporate Acts 4 into it is to live below our means. So we're constantly able to go, oh, there's a need, I'm going to meet it. And there's the need, I'm going to meet it. And then when you guys are ready to follow Kim Sweet somewhere, just let her know. She'll drag you off to Myanmar or, somewhere. And then you can use your gifts of medicine as well as your money. So balance of giving versus saving when young. I would say you're trying to target 10% savings, and I would say 10% giving if you can do it. Those are the 2 targets. I would target that range. And then as you get older, the 10% savings then gets matched with maybe 15% giving as you kind of get into a better space financially. And so, I would say a balance of giving and saving is about 10% of each. You can do it. That's again, why I don't want you to overbuy a car and house. Buy a used car and live in a house that's 1.5 times income. You do that, and you have all kinds of money to take a trip to Tahiti, along with give and save. So those things, that's the way I would live out this Acts 4 model, is live beneath your means. You'll be able to do it then. And just be careful about real estate agents and banks. They'll be like, why are you only borrowing $120,000? You guys could borrow $200,000. Right. And never give another dollar to that orphanage in Sudan that we're trying to support. No, thank you. That means more to me than the other. So, hey, by the way, for the record, if you ask me what's the color of the brick on my house that I've lived in for the last 12 years, I'm not sure I could tell you. So don't put too much stock in your house. It really isn't all that important. In fact, for the last 8 weeks during COVID-19, I lived at the church. I pulled a mattress up here and lived here because I was afraid they were going to shut us down completely from travel, and I didn't want to lose my 20 lectures a week and the technology I had here. So for the last 2 months, I lived in the floor of the education building in the pre-K class. It says P is for piano above my head over and over and over. And so I had a mattress on the mat on the floor in there, and I lived in there for 2 months. No shower on campus. I had to bathe in the baptistry. And you know what? It didn't affect me at all. So look, just, we got to be careful. It's so easy to get entangled in shiny things. I would say, hey, live with your hands open, live below your means. And then here's the deal here. The reason I want you to do all this is so that your joy is off the chart great. When you stand before God, you can go, man, I did that. We did that the right way. And so I really want you to be able to say that. And then when you're way up in front of the line, way ahead of me, when God's, handing out rewards, you can go, hey, we followed your advice better than you did. All right. Well, it was great meeting all you guys. So Stan, I'll email you those. And if we want to get together again, I'll leave that up to you, Stan, let you coordinate whether there's interest to do that or not. We could delve into some of those specifics of things like insurance. That becomes a real difficult thing, especially for people who are not as familiar with the insurance market. And so if we want to have a discussion about some of that and maybe some more specifics on retirement, investing, and buying a house, I wouldn't mind covering those things. Okay?
Do you mind closing us in prayer?
Not at all. Lord God, you are good and kind, and we love you. We thank you so much that you first loved us through your Son, Jesus Christ, and have given all. And so, God, we want to live with our hands open, our lives open before you. Use our gifts and abilities to minister to others. Use our resources to bless others, so that in everything you would be glorified and our joy would be as full as it can be. In the name of Christ Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Daniel. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You guys have a good evening. Good to see you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
Did you get a vote as to who wants to do this again?
No, well, I'll just email them. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just email them.
All right. I'll email you, Stan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.